They fought not for glory, but for survival. Under the burning sun of the Colosseum, thousands of men clashed in blood-soaked arenas while roaring crowds demanded death. Roman gladiators, icons of brutal entertainment and iron discipline. But behind the myth of muscle and honor lies a question that has haunted historians for centuries. Who were these men, really? Were they Roman citizens, slaves, foreign warriors, or something far stranger? For generations, answers were buried under centuries of rubble and myth. Stone inscriptions, faded murals, and ancient scrolls only deepened the enigma. No name, no face, just scars etched into bone. Until now. In a forgotten tomb on the outskirts of a Roman outpost, a team of archaeologists uncovered something no one expected. Well-preserved human remains, sealed in darkness for over 1,800 years. Teeth, bones, and most importantly, ancient DNA. As the samples were rushed to state-of-the-art genetic labs, scientists held their breath. Because what they found would shake the very foundations of Roman history and force us to rethink everything we thought we knew about the empire's most feared warriors. Who were the real gladiators of Rome? By the peak of the Roman Empire, the world trembled beneath its sandals. From the deserts of Africa to the forests of Germania, Rome commanded over 70 million souls. And at the center of this colossal machine stood the gladiators, symbols of strength, obedience, and controlled chaos. Between the 1st century BCE and the 3rd century CE, it's estimated that over 1 million men entered the arena. Some volunteered, most were forced. But their identities were stripped, their pasts erased, their origins lost in the roar of the crowds. The Roman elite viewed them as disposable, yet the people worshipped them as heroes. Their blood fed the spectacle that distracted a restless population. Every major city had an amphitheater, and in some years, games were held for 100 consecutive days. Yet despite their cultural importance, the personal histories of these men remain obscure. Were they criminals from within the empire? Enslaved barbarians from its borders? Or perhaps prisoners of war brought in from the farthest edges of Rome's conquests? For centuries, historians debated, theorized, guessed. But with no written records detailing who these fighters really were, their true origins remained locked in the past. That is, until the tomb was opened, and the genetic trail began to speak. It began with a routine excavation. Just outside the ancient Roman city of Ephesus, located in what is now modern-day Turkey, a group of archaeologists uncovered a forgotten burial site. The graves were simple, unmarked, and modest in construction. Yet something was off. The bones showed signs of repeated trauma, defensive wounds, and severe muscle attachment, all indicators of intense physical activity. And more than that, they all belonged to young males, aged between 20 and 30. Nearby, fragments of iron weapons, netting hooks, and even a bronze gladiator helmet were unearthed. It was no ordinary cemetery. This was a mass grave of fighters. The team realized they had stumbled upon something extraordinary, a gladiator necropolis, possibly the largest ever discovered. The preservation of the bones was remarkable thanks to the mineral-rich soil, but the true treasure was hidden within the teeth and long bones, fragments of ancient DNA still clinging to the past. For the first time, researchers could extract real genetic material from the very men who once fought in Rome's blood-soaked arenas. And this genetic data would soon unveil not only who these men were, but where they came from. The gladiators were ready to speak again, not with swords, but with science. The samples were rushed to a specialized lab in Germany, where geneticists began the delicate process of decoding the DNA. The challenge was immense. Ancient DNA is fragile, fragmented, and easily contaminated. Every strand had to be carefully isolated, amplified, and cross-checked. But this wasn't just about sequencing genes. It was about decoding a history written in blood. Leading the project was Dr. Helena Weiss, a bioarchaeologist with a reputation for unearthing human truths from forgotten bones. Her team compared the gladiators' DNA with modern and ancient genomes from across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. The initial results were surprising. These men didn't belong to a single ethnic group or geographic origin. Instead, the genetic map pointed in all directions. One had markers from the British Isles, another from sub-Saharan Africa, others from the Balkans, Anatolia, and even the Caucasus. The gladiator grave wasn't just a burial ground. It was a genetic mosaic of the Roman Empire's farthest reaches. But how did men from such distant lands end up in the same pit, in the same arena? The answer lay not just in conquest, but in a brutal system of forced relocation, enslavement, and militarized entertainment. Rome didn't just conquer land, it absorbed people, rewrote their destinies, and threw them into the sand to fight for sport. As the genome sequencing advanced, a clearer picture began to form. Mitochondrial DNA revealed maternal lineages stretching across thousands of miles, from the rugged highlands of Thrace to the sun-scorched valleys of Nubia. Y chromosome markers traced paternal roots to Celtic tribes, Semitic clans, and Scythian horsemen. This was no accident. The Roman Empire had systematically harvested human beings from its frontiers, capturing prisoners of war, purchasing slaves from distant traders, and even conscripting local populations into servitude. But the most shocking revelation came from isotopic analysis of the bones. By measuring the levels of strontium and oxygen isotopes, elements absorbed from local food and water, scientists could determine not just where someone was born, but where they had lived before death. The results confirmed it. These men had been uprooted, many as teenagers, transported across continents, trained in gladiator schools called ludi, and ultimately killed for entertainment. They weren't born into Rome. They were consumed by it. The empire had built its games on the backs of foreign blood. And for the first time in history, that blood was telling its story in a language Rome never intended to preserve: genetic truth. It began on distant battlefields, fields of rebellion, conquest, and resistance. In the shadow of Roman legions, entire villages were razed and survivors shackled. Young men, chosen for their strength and youth, were separated from their families and marched for weeks across brutal terrain. Some came from the wind-swept moors of Britannia, others from the burning sands of Syria or the green valleys of Dacia. Once inside the empire, they were sold like cattle at slave markets, stripped of identity and branded. Those deemed physically exceptional were sent to ludi gladiatori, gladiator schools, where their transformation into living weapons began. In these fortified compounds, they trained with wooden swords, learned combat styles like murmillo, retiarius, and secutor, and endured harsh discipline under the watchful eye of a lanista. Bonds formed, rivalries ignited, and all of it led to one place: the arena. There, in front of tens of thousands, they fought not just for survival, but for the faint hope of freedom or glory. Some became legends, most became corpses. But what united them wasn't nationality. It was a shared fate imposed by Rome's hunger for blood and power. Now, centuries later, we can see the invisible threads that bound them, a forced brotherhood woven by empire and violence. The gladiators of Rome were not born of Rome. They were its victims, and its unwilling icons. Through ancient DNA, science has resurrected their origins, shattering the myth of the native-born hero fighting for glory. Instead, we find a sobering truth. The arena was not a stage for Roman valor, but a graveyard for the conquered. Men from across the known world, uprooted, repurposed, and ultimately discarded for the amusement of an empire drunk on domination. And yet, through bone and blood, they speak again, not as symbols, but as human beings. Their story reminds us that history is rarely what it seems, and that the silenced voices of the past are waiting, hidden in dust, stone, and genes, to tell us who we really are. What other legends will fall when exposed to science? What forgotten lives are waiting beneath our feet, sealed in time and waiting to rise? If you were intrigued by the hidden truth behind Rome's most iconic warriors, imagine what else lies buried, unexamined, just beyond the reach of memory. Subscribe, like, and dive deeper with us into the ancient mysteries that history tried to erase. But science refuses to forget. The past isn't dead. It's just waiting to be decoded.